Your impact begins before you say a word. In fact, most audiences decide how they feel about you within seconds of you walking into the room. On today's show, we explore how presence and confidence shape the way audiences experience you long before the first slide or sentence lands. And we got a former senior executive from one of the, I'm going to just do this last paragraph again, hang tight. And we've got a former senior executive from one of the largest financial institutions in the world who's dedicated his work to helping others elevate how they show up, speak, and lead. You ready? Let's go. Today's guest, Tony Bagnato, is a former executive at RBC, Canada's largest financial institution. He launched his executive coaching business in 2020, and he's dedicated to helping professionals to be as successful as they dare. I'm going to go let him take it from here because he'll do a better job than I will telling his story. So welcome to the show, Tony. I'll give you a minute and a half. Think like a pro. The crowd's watching. Tell us how we got here.
All right. Well, Rob, what you talked about earlier, what you mentioned at the beginning about how your impact is created immediately is absolutely correct. Your impact isn't just, the first few seconds when you walk into a room. It's really impacted by every moment that follows that. And after 30 years as an executive sitting in rooms where promotion and talent decisions are made, I came to realize that most professionals don't struggle due to a lack of capability. They struggle because how they show up doesn't match what they want to aspire to, the level that they want to achieve. And I spent 32 years at RBC, as you mentioned, Canada's largest financial institutions and one of the biggest in the world. And I had the pleasure in that time of what I often refer to as 8 distinct careers. I moved across businesses. I led sales teams. I built and ran businesses. And in my last role, I led a team of directors, sales leaders, and hundreds of advisors. And so I've really been on both sides. I've been on the where you're trying to advance your career, trying to achieve as much as you can, and also later in my career deciding who was actually ready. And what I really came to understand and what became really clear over time is that careers don't stall because people aren't working hard enough. They stall because they're not being seen, they're not being heard or understood at the level required to achieve what they want. And in my coaching practice, I work with senior managers and directors who are doing great work, but keep hearing things like, well, they're not quite ready. But it's not about doing more. It's about changing how they show up. It's about changing how they communicate, how they're perceived in the moments that actually matter. Right? Things as basic as, where you sit in a meeting. When you walk into a meeting, where you sit, because that decision is interpreted before you say a word.
Yeah. Hey, Tony, but I like where you left it there. I'm curious. A U-shaped room, right?
Yep.
Where do you sit?
Well, it's a great question. When you walk into a room, do you sit? And again, think about it this way. Many times you're being invited to a senior leadership room and you walk in and there's a spot that's open, it's safe, right? And so you could sit there, or you could sit in at the end of the table where you get a view of the whole room, or you can sit off to the side. But in every case, you're signaling something, right? You're either signaling, I'm here to contribute, or I'm here to lead, right? And that's really what the key is.
Right. Okay. Because that's interesting. Because from I'm always in the pit. I'm the trainer who's walking around the pit. But it was told to me, the corners, like you said, to get into the front corner, left front corner, right front corner, so that you don't really have to turn your shoulders or head to get a good look at the entire room. I also would think it's funny, you brought in lead. I hadn't really connected that. As a leader, when I see somebody sitting in the back, I'm seeing somebody who's just trying to figure out how to get out of the room the safest way possible without making a lot of noise. that doesn't say leadership to me. That says I want to soften the blow of the of whatever is going to be happening here and make sure I can get out. So I still like the corners for me.
Yeah, you're bringing up a really good point, though, which is to me the key, which is that when you watch somebody come into a room, you were judging them. Now,
Right.
it's a harsh word, but it's the reality. Because if you're thinking about it again, you're a director, right? And you're going to a senior executive presentation. You've got this great opportunity in front of you, right? And so you walk into a room and people start to judge you the moment you walk in, right? Where do you sit? Now, I can sit at the end of the table and then I got a view of everybody around the room. I got a great line of sight, right? My body language, okay? All of these impact the leaders in the room's impression of me around my leadership and my competence, right? Because your presence doesn't start when you begin to speak. It starts the moment you choose where to sit, which for
Right.
many people they don't get. They're thinking more about actually delivering the presentation, but recognizing that first step into the room and everything you do before you get to your seat actually sets you up in the mind of the people. They're making a great first impression of you, right? You're going to
Yeah.
decide how that first impression looks.
Right. Huh. It's interesting. Well, let's turn the camera off of them and back on onto the trainer. And by the way, I was looking, wanted to make sure I had this right. I actually did a program for RBC probably
Ah,
15 years ago. It was a sales training workshop. I can't even tell you where in Canada I was.
okay.
I've got 3 million miles in the air. I could track it down, but it made me smile. I do know one thing. We went to a hockey game. Go figure. Uh,
Okay. Well, that narrows it down to, I don't know, a dozen cities.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But just wanted you to know, I did I do it a lot in the financial industry.
Yeah.
So it was a trip up north and I enjoyed it a great deal. All right, let's push forward because I think in terms of our presence, if you think the attention is on the audience, you should see what happens when the instructor or the speaker, it doesn't have to be a trainer. It can be professional speaker, somebody coming in to work with these people. So you talk about impact beginning with presence.
Yep. Yep.
What what do you think presence looks like in the real world of speaking? So now you put on that hat, you're going in and you're going to be talking to that team of yours
Right.
as a subject matter expert slash
Right.
instructor. Uh, how do we define presence in that situation?
Well, it's really, again, it comes down to, you know, I often think about when you see somebody or meet somebody for the first time. We do this subconsciously. We all do. We ask three questions or we make three decisions about these people. Do I like you? Are you credible? And can you help me? And so the same thing happens whether you're making a presentation or whether you're presenting to an executive team. Likability, again, it's not about likability, it's about that confidence that you exude. Is this somebody that I want to engage with? Is this somebody that I'm going to trust? And that happens instantaneously, right? Are you credible? It's not your CV, it's really how you communicate your message, right? And can you help me is how you link your experiences to the needs of the audience. And so all of this happens pretty quick. And it starts with, again, you've done this thousands of times. You walk up on stage or you walk into a room presenting to an audience. It's do you walk in slumped over your shoulders, you're not making eye contact, or are you looking like a sales professional or a presentation professional where you're looking them in the eyes, you're smiling, you're shaking hands, you're firmly making contact. And those first words out of your mouth are what sets the tone in both the way that you're going to deliver and in the mind of the audience,
Yeah, particularly for a sales team, particularly for a sales team. Uh,
particularly.
and I want to double back because I happen to think, and you're my guest. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll bat a thought or an idea, and I
Yep.
want you to fix it, twist it, agree with it, disagree. I never care. By the way, I love when people disagree. Uh,
Okay.
I think one of the most, as I'm older in my career now, I think one of the most dangerous spots to lose an audience is in the opening story of, even now I turned it over to you and I said, all right, Tony, let's hear your journey. You did something that this is my 61st show. I've done over 600, but 61 on this one. You've done something that the other 60 people didn't do. The other 60 people said, in a sense, I was raised on a farm. I learned how to spell, and then I learned how to sell, and and then I worked for this company, then I worked for that company, and then I achieved this, and then I lost that. It's quite a tale. I love telling my story until I realized the only one who was really loving that story was me. I was just trying to establish credibility, but the longer you're at this game, I think the longer that story tends to go.
Mhm, mhm,
And I think it's dangerous. So,
mhm.
what is the opening story? What, in your mind, what should the opening story look like when somebody says, please welcome Tony Bagnato? Okay. What does
Yeah.
it look like?
Well, to me, it's almost like a hook. It's how do you engage the audience in a relevant topic, point, question, doesn't really matter. Actually, you mentioned, introducing Tony Bagnato. I do a lot of keynotes, and I actually, when situations arise, if I have control over this, I actually don't want people to introduce me. I actually want the opportunity to introduce myself, and I do it after I've talked to them a little bit. And so if I don't mind, I'll give you an example. I
Yeah.
did a keynote in front of 1,000 actuaries about a year ago.
Ooh.
And, I was asked to present to a society of actuaries. And again, I'm not an actuary. And so my first question when I was working with my partners who asked me to present was, why the heck would a bunch of actuaries want to listen to me? And so when I walked up on stage, I said, why the heck would a bunch of actuaries, or why the heck would the Society of Actuaries want a non-actuary to speak to 1,000 professionals today? And so now I got their attention. And now I had an opportunity to talk about my experience in insurance, but not as an actuary. My experience working with people like them and what I learned. And things that I could help them with that were non-actuarial, that would help them develop their career in different skills. And that's what was the focus. And then I took an opportunity to introduce myself and provide a little bit about my CV. But that was irrelevant until I was able to tell them something that was of value potentially to them.
Yeah, that's so smart. To your point, I have through the years now, really, when I get and I'm invited out to speak, and somebody says, this is Larry, he will be introducing you. Larry is shaking in his shoes, by the way, usually, and he's got this piece of paper that he's downloaded from the internet, something or other. Now, I have an intro. But I will tell you that I pretty much tell them you can say about these four words
Mhm.
and then use the phrase, I think Rob will do a better job of this than I will. Let's bring him up because Tony and Rob will do better jobs of trying to trim that story, not come up as arrogant. Sometimes that you read a bio, even I don't like me by the time we're at
Yeah,
the end of
yeah,
that
yeah,
bio. And then what am I supposed to do? Another one? So it's a very clumsy handoff. I agree with you. If not telling them, just let me do it. I'd rather them not do it at all. I'm with you. And I mean
yeah,
that nicely. Actually, this fictitious Larry, he's thrilled.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
not in the intro business. He's
yeah,
just probably picked the shorter straw, or he's the low person on the totem pole. Boss
yeah,
didn't want to do it.
yeah,
So, but we're talking about losing a room. We lose that room before we get out of our intro, and
yeah,
that's what makes me nervous. All right, you touched on a couple things. You're a familiar sales guy. You're familiar with the term WIFM,
yeah,
WIFM.
yeah,
What's in it for me?
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm hearing you nibble at a little bit, if
Yeah,
I've got you right.
yeah,
When you're getting up there as quickly as you can, this is what I know, this is what I don't know.
yeah.
But here's what it's in it for you to hear the part that I got for you today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I often tell people, let's keep this really simple. If you're delivering a presentation or if you're, going into a meeting room, to me, it's like an essay. I treat it as simple as an essay. Here's what I'm going to tell you, and here's why it's important to you, and here's the value to you. Then I'm going to provide the story and the details, and then I'm going to wrap up by telling you what I told you and kind of some next steps. Kind of simplistic framework, but at least it gives you something to follow. But it does start off at the beginning with that executive summary or the what's in it for them.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell them up front what you're going to talk about and at least pique their interest and curiosity about some of the value that they're going to get for them as with them, as you say, then why the heck are they going to listen?
Yeah.
right? They're going to pick up their phones, especially now. Before people used to doodle on their pads. Now people have got their phones and they're totally disengaged. That presentation that I gave, the best compliment I got after that presentation was the president of the association came to me and said, Tony, something I noticed in the audience was how few people had their phones in their hands. And I'm
Nice.
thinking, what an interesting, piece of feedback. But that to me spoke to the fact that they saw some value in what I was going to say, and they were willing to give me some time.
Yeah. Well, and I just don't think that's an accident. I don't think it's, I mean, you're not a bad looking guy, but I don't think it's your scary good looks. I
Yeah.
think you've got to, you sort of brought out the elephant in the room of who I am and how I fit in. We share something else, Tony. I spoke to one of my bigger presentations was to a group of actuaries, underwriters, and claims examiners. I think it was very dry group, and I did a lot of them across the country for a number of insurance companies. And I actually built a little sign. I'm not going to, it's around the corner from my office right now. I still have it, but it was 2 years before Michael Jackson's album. And I would get up there and say, hi, here's who I am, here's what I do. And this is going to be a great meeting. If my name isn't, and I had a little rubber band, I would cut it, and a little scroll would come off the lectern and said, Rob the Thriller Jolles in lightning bolts.
Yeah.
And because you've had a bunch of particularly actuaries, pretty analytical audience, it took them a minute of shock, disbelief, and then what I learned was they like to smile too.
Mhm.
You know, they were fine. Now they weren't slapping each other on the back, but that was my way as a 20-something-year-old
Yeah.
of trying to realize that I can't just go into my material quite yet. I'm going to have to warm this up as quickly as I can.
You got to earn it, right? You
Yeah.
got to earn their time, right?
Yeah.
Because again, they're going to leave the room, but they're not going to leave the room physically, but they can leave it cognitively.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question for you. What percentage, this is just a spitball, but we got content and we're really talking about presence right now, in a
Mhm.
sense. What percentage do you think a great speaker should focus on presence versus content?
That's an interesting question, depending on how we define, presence, because how you deliver is a component of your presence.
Let's make it that, Tony. Let's make it what I call the sauce. You got the
Yeah,
content, you know
yeah,
what you're going to teach, the way we're teaching it.
yeah, yeah. Uh, if you call that the presence, and again, obviously non-scientific, but I think it's about 50-50. The content is key because that's really where you're going to link to the with them, as you call it, and what's in it for them and the value. But that has to be the core. But
Right.
I can also go up and in a very monotone tone, speak to people and deliver this information. And my God, they're bored. But how do you make sure that the way you deliver it, the pauses, the inflections, the questions, the way that you engage the audience, shows that both you care, you're interested, and you understand their needs is as important as the content because the
Right.
content's going to weave through it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. We had a conversation before we started, and the mics were off. I
Mhm.
almost want the mics off for this one, but I'm going to tell you, and I made up the question on the fly, and I'm sort of
Mhm.
thinking, how would I answer it? And I think I would actually lean a little heavier on the sauce, on the
Okay.
presence.
Okay.
And now, maybe not with actuaries. I mean, in your one example, you built me a room of very typically analytical people who are
Mhm.
not going to be up for a whole lot of monkey business, as we say. We're not going to be running through peanut butter and playing, too many fun little games. But take a sales audience, and because I've got to keep fighting for that attention, and I'm using that word
Yeah.
liberally, presence, which to
Yeah.
me also defines small group exercises, case studies, role plays, anything that has me not teaching or talking. I'm going to go 60-40. I'm going to go a little heavier on the presence.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, even as I say it, I'm chewing my nails because the one thing we can't do, Tony, is we can never disappoint a room by being a little too heavy on the shtick, on the presence,
Yeah.
not deliver that content.
Yeah, and I think that some of it is, and you might want to put some of this into the sauce, as you call it, but To me, it's about stories as much as it is
Hmm.
content. Stories resonate and stories are remembered. So I can give you a fact, or and I'll use the example. I focused a lot on developing what I call the key power skills, right? There was communication and influence, and how do you engage partners, and talk a little about building your network and communicating your value, things that maybe weren't, well, they weren't things that they learned when they got their actuarial degree. It was purely based on, calculating numbers, driving impact, having an impact on the business. But, that got them to a certain level, that director level as an actuary. But if for those that wanted to advance to more senior levels, there was the broader executive presence skills, right? And learning how to engage people and demonstrate certain things. So for me, then it was about how do I outline the skills without just then starting to go theoretically, okay, this is what is important when you're going to communicate X, Y, and Z. Or I can tell stories. And
Right.
I can give examples of when I was engaging with, actuaries or other insurance professionals as an executive. I can share a story about what I saw somebody else do and maybe some coaching I provided to them to help them become more effective.
Right.
So if you call stories as part of the sauce, then I'll agree with you on the 60
Yeah.
40 and
Yeah.
maybe the higher level. But
Yeah.
I, to me, see that also as the content.
Right. Perfect. I do consider stories a little bit saucy.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're in a, look, 50-50 is already a big number. Let's
Yeah.
not bury the lead here. I think
Yeah.
most people, particularly a more analytical instructor, getting in front of an analytical audience, is had to sit down just now, okay,
Yeah.
and take a deep breath, because those stories you tell, the way we're setting it up, all these things we're talking about, that's what makes these programs. That's what keeps the cell phone out of their hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It also gives us a little bit of movement. I look forward to a story sometimes when I've got some pretty technical content because I can take a deep breath. I can wander on this story a little bit. It's helping me and it's helping the audience. All right,
Yeah,
let's flip it
especially
a
when
little
there's
bit.
sorry, especially when there's stories that we use often,
Yeah.
because we all have that, handful of a dozen stories that are so integrated into everything we do, right? So that also sometimes brings us back to our confidence position, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm making faces at Tony right now because I would never tell a story more than once. Now, 1,000 times.
Yes,
And you
exactly.
know what? And people ask this question, and I'll out me. You tell a story, maybe not 1,000 times, but a few hundred times. Uh, does it get old? And the answer for me is never. I look forward to telling the story. It's not the exact story. I add a little, take a little, I bring in somebody's name. I'm walking in the audience sometimes. I'm standing over. I never get tired of telling a story. If the only
No.
time I get a little anxious is if you say, I'm going to put you in front of the same exact room you spoke to last year.
Yeah.
Now I'm not telling that same story. I got to be aware.
Sure. I would say though that if they're really good stories, they have a lot of pieces to them. And it's like anything else. When I hear it the second time, I'm probably going to pick up things I didn't hear the first time. And
Mhm.
again, we're going to deliver it slightly different. So I think there's that fine line. But I think that if our messages really add that value, we're going to find a way to incorporate it into a discussion with the audience.
Yeah. I'm going to pay you a compliment. You didn't go for it. Meaning, I wasn't trying to trick you, but most people who haven't done this for a while would have jumped in and agreed with me wholeheartedly. Oh, yeah, yeah. Winston said, well, maybe. You politely agreed and disagreed. I'm going to meet you in the middle. I'll tell you, I used to struggle with this so bad, Tony, that I could have an audience of 500. And if somebody came up and said, I saw you 3 years ago in Chicago, in my mind, I'm changing stories around. I'll show this guy. Okay. I don't, I'm authentic. I'm in the now. And it was my father-in-law who told me almost exactly what you said, which was, you know, some people really came to hear the story again. They
Yeah.
loved that story.
Yeah.
It's like watching a comedian. Sometimes I saw Brian Regan. I don't know if you ever heard of this comedian, Brian Regan, very successful comedian. Has a few bits he's told a few times. I've seen him a few times. And when he starts it, and people begin applauding. He just said, what is it with Pop Tarts? That's a whole shtick is people applaud. He goes, oh, so you like Pop Tarts, do you? And he was basically just communicating but anyway, long story short, I learned what you just taught everyone. and I learned it when there was only two people in the room, okay, out of 500, that if an audience hears you're coming back for another year-end meeting and they saw you, that we have to appreciate the fact that if it's an A-plus story, they that audience probably wants to hear it again. We can always add a little something to it, but we can't be afraid. Tony, I don't like the word afraid, but I was concerned about it and with a small percentage. So it's a really good point you're making, and I'm glad you're reinforcing that for this audience. A novice wouldn't get that one. Okay. Now, I'll trip you up. Give me a minute. I got you. I'll get one by you. How about, not really, by the way.
Come on, bring it on, bring it
Yeah, all
on.
right. Yeah. What do you do when a guy's out there? Uh, I'm going to leave my questions. I'll give you a tough one I had one time because I'm now.
Oh, you're going off script, are you?
Yeah, well, we're
Okay.
way
All
off
right.
script now.
All right.
I'm like, okay, I'm seeking a volunteer in an audience of about
Yeah.
200 for an exercise.
Okay.
Normally, the rules are when there are 200 people for a keynote and you ask for a volunteer, you're going to get a somewhat confident person putting up their hand. I'm not picking them, they're picking me, right? I one time I was in a place and I said, I'm looking for somebody maybe have had a situation. Somebody put up their hand. I said, all right, you and me, we're going to go. I've got about 15 questions for you. We're going to chart it up over here. We're going to track the way you make decisions. Everybody dug in and I said, all right, it was a car exercise. What kind of car were you driving? And the guy had a very, very difficult stutter. And the whole room kind of took a breath. What are we going to do here? Okay. And so, Tony Bagnato, you're into this exercise. You can see that this is might be making this a little uncomfortable, but we're in. What's the move from Tony's camp?
Well, I'm going to find a way as best as possible to make that person comfortable
Hmm.
because they had the confidence to put their hand up, and that's not easy, especially in an audience of 200. And so to me, it's probably asking them a few questions, warming it up a little bit, kind of creating that one-on-one, almost to the point where, especially if I've taken the opportunity to go into the audience, if I'm trying to do it across the room, it's a little more difficult, but I prefer to get off the stage. I'll walk over. I want to have a conversation that's a little closer. And I want to kind of make them feel like we're having a conversation one on one, getting them engaged and get them comfortable with me so that, everybody's going to be a little nervous. I'm nervous at that point as well. I mean, we all are because we care. So I'm probably going to spend my time getting to know them a little bit and engaging them a little bit and then helping them feel confident and comfortable to have the conversation. That would be the place I'd start.
Beautiful. Uh, I got there. I didn't get, my head was spinning. My knee-jerk reaction was maybe I grab another volunteer. Can't do that. Be careful not to finish the sentences off or supply the words that the person's looking for. But I did what you said. My gut reaction was I what didn't intend to get into the audience for this one, but to get closer, warm this up as fast as I can. And I can tell you that I had about 16 questions. Um, I trimmed it. You see, nobody knows. I didn't say I'm coming at you with 16.
Yeah.
Trimmed it a little, warmed it up just like you said, and we got through it just fine. But I will tell you, in 40 years, I still remember it because there was a shock factor that you have to recover from of what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I want to handle this as compassionately as possible, but I don't have a book on this one. And I loved your move, and I made that move. But you know, you nailed it immediately, which was let's it's Operation Warm Up. Let's just warm this up, soften this up, shorten the questions a little bit that I'm asking, make them easier to respond to without tipping my hand. But all right, I can't get one by you, so now we're back on script. Tell me,
All right.
you son of a. How about a common behavior that if I had finished that sentence, I would have been actually undermining my own performance and that person's ability to perform with me. What are some other habits that you think a speaker can make when they're undermining their own performance without realizing it? Real fast, me telling that long story about me because it's really interesting. undermines my performance. So I'm giving you a couple of examples here. What would
Mhm.
be another one? Somebody listening right now that might not know that they don't know that might you might be able to help them with here.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about the focus of our conversation today, one of the things that you wanted to focus on a little bit was meetings. And so
Yes.
I want to bring, because again, presentations and meetings are really the same thing. It's delivering a message to an audience, whether it's an executive team or whether it's a group of 200, as you pointed out a moment ago. So let me and this can apply to both, but let me go specifically to something that I saw as a gap, especially with, say, a director level individual presenting to an executive group. It's a critical time and it's an amazing opportunity, but success often comes down to, understanding what your audience, how they think and how they process information. And so when I think about that, far too many people come into a room and they're just throwing out everything, right? Like the background, the context, the analytics. And the people are sitting there going like, well, like, just tell me what I need to know. And
Right.
so it's really about, to me, reading your audience and making sure that you understand how they process, what they want to hear, and how you can best capitalize on that situation. And the other thing that I'll point out, or the other situation that I come across is um, when people don't know the answer to the question. You're presenting in front of 200 people, somebody throws you out a question and you don't know. And so what you sometimes have people do is that they stumble. They over explain, they talk in circles, and that credibility that they've spent 20 minutes building up is eroding answer by answer. And it's oftentimes where you just take a moment to say, you know what, that's a great question. Here's how I'm thinking about it. But you know what? Why don't you and I chat afterwards? Because I want to get you an answer to that specific question, but I just don't know right now.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next topic. But if you don't, you're just going to erode the confidence that you built up, the audience has in you, by trying to make something up as you went along. Again, whether it's an executive team or whether it's an audience of 200.
Yeah. Oh, what a wicked web we weave. Particularly Tony, when you're dealing with a technical audience.
Mhm.
I've been on contracts before where there's this is not an opinion. They need to know a specific reading or number or measurement. And we sometimes we mean to say, I think it's, but it comes out as it's.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And like you say, I would like to say I haven't been here for a good 20 years on one of those, but I remember sort of slipping into, it wasn't, I think I'm guessing at that. Whoops, already out. And then being a follow-up question. And the room surprisingly getting a little bit warmer. I don't know. Did somebody turn the heat on in here?
You're
And
kind of
yes,
pulling the collar out a little bit. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
doing just like you said, my answers would get a little bit longer
Yeah.
as I would. So I always love I think you build a lot of credibility with a technical audience when you say, I don't have all the answers, but I know where to get all the answers. So when I don't know an answer, I'll scribble it down here. I'll get it to you during the break. We'll email it out. But it really frees you up. And if you want to see an audience really start to trust a speaker,
Yeah.
uh, I've only lied to an audience a few times in my life, but I can, with a smile, tell you I've lied a couple times when I knew an answer and told an audience I wasn't sure because this was a program I taught a lot of times for a few years. I pretty much knew all the answers, but I could get the sense this was a 8 hour program. This audience wasn't going to stop until they got one by me. So
Yeah.
let them get one by me right now. It wasn't the first one, an hour in. Boy, that's a great. I think it's 11, but I'm not here to guess. Let me write it down, confirm it, and we'll get it right after lunch. I'll have it confirmed for you. And I would do that a few different times when just to calm them down and go, okay, now we can trust him. He will tell us when he doesn't know.
Yeah,
So,
just kind of transition this. I mean, we're both sales guys, right? And
yep.
we talked about that before. And I always think about one piece of advice that I always gave, especially when dealing with large cases, was a sales professional never leaves a meeting without a reason to follow up. And one of the things that you're talking about from an audience perspective, but it could be in a meeting, is saying I'll get back to you might not necessarily reflect that you don't know, but you need that as your reason to follow up, to continue that conversation. So there's going to be opportunities where it's the right solution
Yeah.
to a situation.
That's, that's oh yeah. I didn't realize you turn that into a sales message. Not bad. I
I,
have to agree.
you know,
All right. And by the way, I'm thinking when I asked you that question about something that I think gets by people a little bit. One of my pet peeves when I'm coaching people is too much information. Just ease up on the information. I know on a paper it looks like this is going to fly. You did it in front of a mirror and somehow you think that gave you a reading on timing. But it is amazing what happens to timing, particularly when we haven't done a program delivery. When we look at 2 pages and I go, that's an hour and then some.
yeah,
We'll
yeah,
learn. So I'm always erring on let's lighten it up, get back to that presence. Let's tell a few stories. Let's back it up with a few studies. Let's show a video. Let's do some other things. But I think the temptation is let's just keep pushing information in. It's
yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah, I think there's that, and I talked to that very briefly a couple minutes ago when that director's walking into that meeting, and they think that to build their credibility, that they need to throw a bunch of information at the executive team when they're missing the full opportunity that they have when they were given the opportunity to get in front of that executive team, which is to help build credibility around their potential to take on more senior roles,
Yeah,
to fully capitalize on that opportunity by providing what do I want to achieve, what's in it for them, the decision we need, the solution, and then go and execute and come back.
yeah.
And far too many people go and they just read off a deck that the executives probably already read, and they miss this wonderful opportunity to advance themselves and the business.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And in sales trainer to sales trainer, an example of what we're talking about in terms of content is I'll get in front of a client who'll say, we can give you 90 minutes. Okay. We're going to talk about urgency. We're going to talk about trust. Because I know I always want urgency. If I'm going to teach a sales team, I don't care if I get them for 2 days. At some point, we have to make this nice to have a need to have. Is there a process there? Okay. But then it's the client that will push us sometimes. Could we put a little opening tactic? Because they got to open it. They do a lot of cold. All right. Yeah. Well, we can't do a sales thing without objection handling. Okay. But I could do 90 minutes on objection handling. And
Or
this is
closing or
right. Now you see where
discovery
I'm
or pick a
going.
topic.
I think
Exactly.
sales training is really sneaky.
Yeah.
You really have to guard against crowbarring more stuff in
Yeah.
because it's just not going to fly. The cell phones will be up and out of those pockets. All right, last
Well,
question. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. And then you tend to cover a very important topic at a very superficial level, and they've
Right.
got nothing out of it. To your point, whether it's objection handling, discovery, closing, from a sales perspective on a training, like that's a mod, like that's a day, or that's a 90 minutes. And let's not disturb it by trying to cover the whole sales framework in one meeting, because all you're going to do is just fluff it up and add no value, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, look, it's entertaining, but
Yeah,
nobody's going to implement a thing.
right.
And I still believe, when I, some client, when I get flown out to be somewhere and I'm the subject matter expert, I've got to be the one that steps up and says, no, we can't put that in.
Yes.
We can't. I can give you a module, you can do it tomorrow, but we're going to be judged on not only how entertaining we are and how informative we are, but how much sticks. And that takes time. That means it's like golf. At some point, you're going to have to grab the club and swing it a little bit.
Well, it actually goes back to when you're doing a presentation or when I'm being asked to present, and I'm sure that you've had this many times yourself, but the presentation is the outcome. The most important conversation that you could have is when you're talking to the people who are engaging you to go speak. But for me, it comes down to the question that you ask the person who engaged you. How are you going to define success for me presenting to your team? What's the outcome? What's the impact? Because that then is going to guide what the content is going to be.
I agree. And you're right. It's easy to just be an order taker. Tony, we want you to talk. We're going to give you 60 minutes. We got a great team for you to talk to, and we just need you to fire them up at this kickoff meeting for us.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Well, what does that mean? Okay.
yeah. Tell me a little bit about your audience. What's on their mind? What are some of the challenges they're facing? How are you going to define success?
Yeah.
Then as you say, you're not the order taker. Then you're going to say, okay, here's what I'd suggest,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah. And then we stand by it. But it doesn't, you can't have it both ways. You can't take one thing a speaker can't do is if you're disagreeing with what a client's asking you to do and you do it and it doesn't work out, you can't look and go, well, Tony, you're the guy who told me to do it.
Sure.
Life doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I've got relationships with firms, that are 15 years old, 20 years old. That you want to stick around, not be one and done.
Yeah.
You have to belly up to the bar and look at a client and go, love to, but not 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And I've never had a client that didn't ultimately really respect the fact that I was saying that. Remember, they actually want to hear that from us. They don't know. We can't be afraid.
Well, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you
Mhm.
do, if they say, here's 90 minutes, go do this, and you do it, it doesn't have any impact, they're going to say, well, why didn't you tell me? You're the professional.
Right, right. Well,
So
you
I'd
said you
rather take
wanted
the chance
objection
that I asked the right
handling.
questions. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. No, that's only in the car when I'm driving. You said you wanted it. But in front of the client, you looked at me, you told me to build a program. We worked together. I blessed this program and put it on. It's mine now. And if it doesn't work, I have to own up to it. So I hope people are listening to the fact that I know it's not an easy conversation. And at the end of the day, boy, we'd love to get that gig or get that presentation. But want to work for 15 years with that client? It's tough sourcing clients these days. Want to work longer with one client and not keep sourcing others? Ultimately, you'll have a client for life if they can trust you and realize you're not doing this because you get tired in 90 minutes. You're doing it because you want the best program you could possibly deliver for this organization. And here's how to do it.
Well, and again, not only are you going to work with that company for a long period of time, as you point out, but as importantly, you can either prospect or you can get a referral or an introduction. And if you do really, really well with one company, they all have partners that they're going to say, listen, I had Rob in and he did a wonderful job with my team focusing on X, Y, and Z. Sounds like what you're looking for. Why don't you talk to Rob?
Yeah.
Well, that won't happen if all you do is, basically deliver what they say they think they wanted, which turns out to be a watered down version of success, right?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I've got a bunch of other questions for you, but you are now currently in dangerous territory of setting a record for the longest presentation whisperer show. I'll tell you this one on the air. I was asked one time, how long should a podcast go? I was asking a mentor of mine, and he looked at me and said, as long as it's interesting. As
Yeah,
long as it's
that's fair.
interesting.
That's fair.
So kudos to you. Congratulations. How do people get a hold of you?
Well, before I answer that, let me leave your audience with this, Rob.
All right.
If you're doing great work, right, and you're getting positive feedback, but you're not advancing, there's a high probability it's not your performance. It's how you're showing up in key conversations. In every organization, there are rooms where names are being discussed, and you're either being positioned as ready or not. And how you show up in key situations and conversations like meetings we discussed today or when you're delivering presentations is key. So if that resonates, where you can find me is on LinkedIn, where that's where I do the majority of my content. I post most days about leadership, confidence, and communication. And I also have a website, communicatingconfidence.com, and a YouTube channel if you want a little more detail.
Good. And how do you spell Bagnato? I forgot.
Bagnato.
Bagnato.
Oh,
Got it. All right. Just a little trick to get that name out there a second time. All right,
perfect.
listen, absolute pleasure. I listen. It's funny. You really walk the walk. I want to finish up, and yet I have to compliment you on how you even did that.
Oh, no, go
Uh,
ahead. Come on, bring
yeah,
it.
yeah. I'll find something crappy about you. Give me a moment. But I'm looking at you as a presenter right now.
Okay.
And I think one of the biggest move we talked about the presence and how we get started. Sometimes we don't talk about how we finish. So here's the presentation whisperer saying, "All right, Tony, we got enough of you here. Tell us how." And you went, "Hold on." And you ended with, in a sense, one final story. Do you understand how many times a speaker will be on stage and a client will maybe in a Q&A will say, "Okay, no more questions, Tony. Thank you." And we go, well, thank you. That's not exactly sticking your landing. I actually recommend to people, and I'll do it again right now, when you're finished, you don't have to say thank you. You can say, "If I may, I'd like to leave you with one last story or one last thought. Let's stick that landing. Tony, you stuck the landing. Congratulations.
Thank you, my friend.
Absolute pleasure talking to you. And I was getting a kick out of the way of your O's. It tips the Canadian thing with you.
O's and A's.
Yeah, yeah. But absolute pleasure meeting you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
You bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For more resources and to connect with Rob, visit thepresentationwhisperer.com.